news stories about Chinese individuals who go to prison for 5 years or 10 years for arguing against the state or some sort of freedom of speech issue, and they're splashed all over our television screens, and presidents of the United States and members of Congress and presidents of European nations come forward and demand that this Chinese individual be released or this Korean individual be released on freedom of speech. And yet right here in Europe, in France, Austria, Germany, and other nations, we have people right now in jail simply for having an opinion, and uttering that opinion, by the way, in a very mild way and just basically an historical way, just even a contrast opinion. Your brave leader, Jean-Marie Le Pen, he's still facing a court case, isn't he, on simply making a remark that as far as occupations go, the German occupation of France wasn't especially harsh. How is he standing on that particular
Yes, especially compared. He said that it was not particularly inhuman. I don't know if you can say that in English. Well, obviously there has been lots of sufferings, and there has been people killed and oppressed, and he didn't deny that. He's a war orphan, by the way.
Right.
Second World War orphan, his father was killed when he was 12, and he's facing all these charges with much courage as usual. But I really feel bad that this kind of thing can happen in my country. Well, it was obvious that it was much worse, in Poland or in other places than in France.
7 to 9 million Germans were uprooted at the end of the Second World War by the Soviets, and even after the end of shortly after the end of the German occupation. And I don't expect you to comment on this because I don't want to get you in trouble, but I can say whatever I want to say. I'm an interviewer. But in Germany. Shortly after the Germans defeated France in the war, they made an agreement with Marshal Pétain, and they freed their French military prisoners almost immediately. Whereas in Germany, for a year after the war, when the whole war was over, when there was no threat from any state anymore, up to 1 million Germans were held in captivity after the war, and many hundreds of thousands of Germans were held by the Soviets, the Allies, and they didn't even come home. And so, what Jean-Marie Le Pen said, whether people agree that it's true or not, freedom of speech is freedom of speech. And when you can't utter an opinion about an historical event, simply a slight opinion and a comparison opinion, what freedoms we have left? Where is freedom of speech? That's the real question.
Yes. Anyway, I want to strengthen the point that we are not obviously mainly discussing about historical problems.
Right.
This kind of cases occur only when there are questions by journalists. So if it is forbidden to answer, it should be forbidden also to question. One has to be perfectly logical. If these matters are no longer open for debate, so why are the questions? Anyway, what is really surprising, as you mentioned it, is that, for example, in European Parliament, people are discussing, discussing and voting resolutions and things like that about human rights all over in the world. And also, I don't know, let's, for example, you take the example of Tibet. Yes, well, Tibet has an ancient culture and civilization quite different from China, and the Tibetans are protesting against Chinese massive immigration in their homeland.
Right.
Which makes that they are becoming, some of them at least feel becoming like foreigners in their home country. This is good. We praise and Tibetans for this resistance, and the Parliament, the European Parliament, is supporting the claims of the Tibetan people. But what about the French who want to remain in a European country, not an African country? What about the the same attitude when it comes to a European nation is described as a racist, xenophobic, and so on, which is really unbelievable. It is in fact perfectly logical. I think it is a kind of a subversion. It is a kind of a psychological war, psychological warfare, and to win this war, to get the European and especially the young people to let them to accept this kind of progressive, gradual invasion, one has to destroy the reaction, the strength that they could show, that they could manifest to react against this situation.
You've got to silence the dissidents, right? Just the same way the Soviets silenced the dissidents in the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And here the feeling of guilt is very important. So that's why from the primary school down from the primary school to the university, they are kept thinking that they are bad, that if they don't accept immigration, they are racist, that racism is bad, that we are indebted to Africa because of slavery, because of colonialism, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is to destroy any possibility for the people to react.
For the listeners, to give you a visual view, our listeners, I was driving from Paris back up to near Brussels, where I was at the Euro conference just recently. And on the way out of the downtown area of Paris, we went through some of the suburbs, mostly African suburbs, and I can tell you it was an amazing. I've read about this and I've heard about it and I've heard accounts of it, but to see it with my own eyes, some of these areas, the infrastructure was incredibly bad. There was massive amounts of trash in the streets. Just amazing. And we went through some areas where I didn't even see a white European face. I mean, literally, I was just amazed at the incredible. Many of the buildings had massive amounts of graffiti on them. Some of the windows broken out, weeds growing up. It was really quite an experience for me to see that. And I really, when I drove through there, and I've known and studied the history of France for all my life. I always admired French culture and French heritage and philosophy, and to see these things, it just literally brought some tears to my eyes to see France on the way to I believe in oblivion. Bruno, I want to talk about a couple other short issues before we run out of time here in this interview. You've only got about 15-20 minutes left. One is that I know you've been very active in trying to make sure that Russia is being given a fair shake in the European Union, and to counter the media demonization that's going on right now about Russia. Russia doesn't tend to stand with the United States on the globalist issues, and Russia has been against the American adventurism in the Middle East and the Iraq War, for instance, and certainly is trying to defuse the possibility of war with Iran. And could you give us your views on this created animosity, this propaganda, really, I think, against Russia that's going on in Europe, and what we can do to keep peace and realize that the Russians are truly our brothers and sisters, and we shouldn't allow this anti-Russian kind of policy?
Yes, you're perfectly right. Well, we consider that Russia is a European country. It is a Christian country. Even we cannot leave the Orthodox world influenced by the Greek civilization. We can just leave it on the shore we need to have a better cooperation. We need to have a better integration. Obviously, I was, and Jean-Marie Le Pen was, and we were a few to be strongly anti-communist when most of the intelligentsia in France and in Western Europe was more or less, influenced by Marxism and some very, very active Marxist and communist agents in the world of, let's say, the media, the university, school, the arts, literature, philosophy, and so on.